takes it a minute. And you are live. So hello, everyone out there on the internet. My name is Kevin Griffin, and welcome to the Swift Kick Show. We'll wait for a moment or two and let people get into the room. I have verified that the feed is up. So sorry that we're only like a minute late. So, John, I don't think that's a big deal at all, right? No. It's amazing the things that go wrong 10 minutes before you're supposed to go live. People, I don't think will understand. Technology can never just work. It's amazing. All right. Well, everyone's getting in. If you're in the chat, say hi and tell us where you're from. I'm going to load up some slides right here. John, to answer your earlier question, yes, they'll still be able to see you. All right. There we go. And they can still see us while these slides are up. So again, welcome everyone to the Swift Kick Show. My name is Kevin Griffin, and I'm so thankful to have you with us today. And in case you don't realize if you're in the right place or not, our session today is going to be 5 fast fixes for your app's user experience with my very good friend, John Athayde. John, did I say your last name right? I always can't ever remember if I say it right or not.
No, it's cool. It's Athayde, but it's
okay.
Numerous ways. Depends on the country.
Yeah. All right. Let me. You know what? I accidentally started on the wrong slide. That was horrible. Oh, what a rookie mistake. Those who have never been with us before, this is a series hosted by my company, SwiftKick. We're a training and consulting company based out of Chesapeake, Virginia. And I grew up in the developer community. And the biggest facet of that is you give back as much as you take. So this is one of the ways that we give back to the developer community, and it gives great people like John a platform to talk about whatever they want from the comfort of their farm, in John's case, which we'll talk more about that in a moment. If you're on the social medias, we would love to connect with you. The best news of all is that we finally got enough subscribers to get a actual vanity URL for our YouTube channel. So we actually have to change the slide because it's no longer just search for SwiftKick. It's actually youtube.com/c/SwiftKick. It's so much easier to find. In a couple of weeks, we have a good friend of mine, Matt Groves. He's a developer evangelist for Couchbase. He'll be joining us talking about NoSQL and specifically security based around NoSQL, because a lot of folks, me as well, have lived in worlds where Mongo is just not secure out of the box, and you have to take a lot of steps to get your NoSQL databases to be secured. So look out for that. We're also booking new speakers now from April and beyond. If you're out there and you're interested in doing a episode of the SwiftKick Show, we would love to have you. Reach out to me or SwiftKick on Twitter and just let us know if you're interested. All right. And like I said, we have Mr. John Athayde. I said it right that time. And before we begin with John, I'm going to ask John a couple questions. Are you ready, John? I did not prepare him at all. All right, so our first question is, it's an easy one. John, who are you? Who do you work for? And what do you do here?
My name is John Athayde. I'm the VP of design for a small company called CargoSense. We're a logistics company focused on big data, tracking shipments, things of that nature. A lot of the stuff we do, we help companies figure out where things went wrong in a shipment so they can go back and fix their supply chains. Before that, I was with Living Social for 3 years, running their internal tools, UX, and front end group. I was part of the bigger engineering team for internal tools under Glenn Vanderberg. And on the side, since now 20 years now going on, I've been doing a thing called Meticulous, which is basically my consulting umbrella for anything I want to do creative.
Awesome. So now I ask everyone, what's your origin story? Take us all the way back to little John, and how did John get into technology, design, UI, UX, all that good stuff?
Technology was with the Mac SE that is sitting right over here, um, and HyperCard, of all things. Which, if
I
you
remember
haven't,
HyperCard. Yeah.
right, totally cool. One of those things you could like. It was like the web before the web. It had stacks and pages, and the greatest thing about it, it had examine or like view source. You could like right click on something or control click or go and say see the source code for this button, and that to me was just I can change what the button does. Oh man, 12-year-old me just went crazy and was making all sorts of little fun programs and trying to understand. Pascal was way above me, and that's what the Mac used to be written in. But I could do a lot of stuff in HyperCard. Design wise, I rolled into 8th grade and joined the yearbook team. And this is early, like this is about 89, 90. So we were still doing old style print paste up where you have a sheet and you draw the boxes and you say, this is this. And I've got 14 lines and you go type it on a typewriter. And really old style, it's called paste up, the old style way of doing print. Learned PageMaker and just kind of those all merged together in 95 when I, got Netscape 1 and was like, web pages, great backgrounds. These are amazing. So, and then just from there, I've been going, doing different things. I really started focusing more on UX, and I got into the Rails community very early on in 2006. And Amy Hoy and I ran a company for a year and change doing UX projects for a lot of Rails-based startups and banks and things of that nature. And I've been doing that ever since.
Awesome. You really take me back with HyperCard. I remember being in elementary school. I was like 4th or 5th grade, and this is when we got our first computer. I was learning QBasic, and I went to the school librarian, and because that's who you went to back in those days to say, I want to learn something. What do I do? I'm like, I'm trying to learn how to program my computer, and she's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Why don't you try this thing called HyperCard? And I remember sitting down going, this isn't programming. Like little 10-year-old punk Kevin is in there telling the librarian she's wrong. But I did HyperCard, learned HyperCard, and then never did HyperCard ever again after elementary school. But I've done my fair share. So that takes me way back. That's awesome.
To senior year, I was doing sound crew. For a long story I don't need to go into, but I was running the sound crew for the musical, and they had a bunch of sound samples. And instead of just doing this off of like a cassette, I was like, oh, no, I'm going to get a Mac and I'm going to put it here next to the soundboard. I'm going to have buttons on a screen to cue the sounds. It's stupid overkill, but that's.
But did it work?
It worked.
It worked. Yeah, that's awesome. So, John, what do you do outside of tech?
Well, I'm on a farm, and you can see behind me, this is. The other half of my office is a recording studio. So I played in bands for a long time, and I still on occasion do that. A lot of it's now just recording stuff. And then here on the farm, it's about 14 acres. We've got goats, chickens, a pony, and we're putting in an orchard. And we're doing, if people are familiar with it, we're doing something called permaculture here. Other people call it regenerative agriculture, but basically looking at ways of improving the landscape, improving the earth without having to go in and do traditional like plow and till and all that kind of stuff. So it's my commute is taken up with gardening and animals instead of driving down.
That's a good set of hobbies. So you mentioned that you originally got started in the Rails community. Are you still hardcore Rails, or has your tech stack changed any?
Most of the work I do on my own is Rails. At Cargo Sense, I think we're retiring our last piece of Rails infrastructure. Everything there is Elixir, which I am very junior in, and then we've got a lot of React component, kind of as our layer there for the customer facing stuff. So I get more involved there as I'm doing implementation work with the guys there like Rodrigo and Bruce and Ben. But I've dabbled a little bit in Angular. I used to do PHP, but I'm recovering. So, but I still have I've heard Laravel is great, but I haven't looked at it yet. But I still have flashbacks to some bad PHP projects in the early 2000s. So it's, and most of the stuff I'm doing though is still very much Rails and the Rails view layer. Bruce and I wrote that book together, and it's one of those things I'm really comfortable in. So instead of spending all my time Googling Stack Overflow, I only spend about half my time Googling Stack Overflow.
That's how you know an expert from a non-expert. Yeah, I Google half the time, and I just find my own answers. It's yeah. Well, alrighty. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop it there, so you have plenty of time to talk. Okay. I'm going to turn off my video and my mic, but those of you out in the chat room, if you have any questions, just feel free to chime in, and we'll interrupt John as appropriate. And all right, John, take it away, sir.
All right, here we go. Let me turn on the screen share here. Entire screen. All right, can you guys see the slide deck?
Yep, I see it right here.
All right, excellent. Cool. I'm going to actually skip through the initial slides because we just talked about all this. Like I said, I used to work at Living Social. I do Meticulous on the side, and then I'm the VP of Design at CargoSense. And I wrote this book with Bruce, so I have a lot of opinions on how design is implemented, at least in a Rails app. So today we're talking about 5 fast fixes for your app's user experience. And the first thing we want to clarify here is that user experience is not necessarily the user interface. These phrases and terms get just munged together, mostly by recruiters who don't understand what's going on. But UX is really this discipline that encompasses dozens of other disciplines. And if you look here, we've even got computer science in the bottom left-hand corner. We're talking architecture, industrial design, interaction design, motion, marketing and communications, just human factors, sociology, psychology, all these other things come together under the moniker of user experience design. And there's a lot of overlap here. And so a lot of people in the field specialize in different sections of this. And this has kind of been broken down. The titles are starting to make a little more sense. And this just came out in the last 2 weeks. This is this great kind of like where the job description lives. So if you're a UX researcher, you're really on the research side of things. You do a little bit of the synthesis. You're not really doing the prototyping, the design, or the build. But as you get into kind of these more, as you move up the stack here, you get less specialized to more generalist. So UX engineer, unicorn, quote unquote, the team of one kind of approach, a UX designer in a broad sense, kind of see how these guys live in different sections on a team. So what is user experience and why should we care? So user experience, let's go for a Jacob Nielsen definition. He is probably one of the founding fathers, as it were, of modern UX, and can be a little bit of a curmudgeon sometimes, but he's there for good reason. So UX is 5 factors. It's the promptness with which we learn something as we use it, the efficiency a user can attain while making use of a system, how easy it is for them to remember how to use it, the level of error-prone issues that we find, and the level of satisfaction. So as we look at these things, you can start to, certain things are easier to achieve than others. Some of them are very subjective, level of satisfaction. You could have 2 different people. One is very satisfied and one is completely unsatisfied with the exact same system. But some of these things are very much quantifiable and measurable. Promptness, how efficient something is, how many steps something takes. Coming back on memory, how often you trigger an error or a user breaks out of a flow. So there's always room for improvement, but you're going to start running out with the easy wins here. So a couple other terms that you're going to hear here. We've got design thinking. Design thinking came from Tim Brown, who's the CEO of IDEO, which is a big product company. And it's innovation powered by direct observation of what people want and need in their lives. And then also we're looking at what they like and dislike about the way particular products are made, packaged, marketed, sold, and supported. That's a whole lot of extra things outside of our typical, we're building an app. And it's something that we're going to use the designer sensibilities. And designer here, I'm going to say, is very broad. It's not just the graphic designer or visual designer. And methods to match what people's needs are with what's technologically feasible. Well, that sounds more like a tech person saying, here's how I can solve this problem from different sides. And then what's a viable business strategy to make that value happen? You've all heard lean and thrown around, but lean comes out of Toyota. So this is Taiichi Ono. He's the founder of the Toyota production system. And this became lean manufacturing in the US. And one of the things that he did was start to figure out how they could be more efficient with building cars. And they took it to the nth degree and really took the United States car companies for a spin. They could not keep up. And one of the big concepts here was that waste. So work plus waste is your capacity. And when you lower waste, you can increase work because capacity isn't changing. So waste is even things like waiting. So queuing. So how much time do you spend managing just like your issue queue or having designs lined up to code? That's also waste. And in doing this, that led them to a profit margin in the early 2000s that was 8.3 times the industry average by just eliminating waste. And so we're looking at like some of the stuff from lean thinking, which is kind of the introduction to for America to the lean production system or the Toyota production system, was coming up with these kind of factors here. So specifying what the customers value, identifying the value stream, making the value flow without interruption, letting the customer pull value from the producer, etc. So this kind of became lean startup, which everybody knows as build, measure, learn. But this right here is rapid waterfall. Anyone that you're doing the same thing over and over again. It's really not agile. And so what happens is you combine all these things together. And this came out of Nordstrom's design lab. And so the yellow is design thinking, the red is lean startup, and the blue is agile. So once you start applying all these things together, you can get into a much better mindset because you're not saying, oh, we're only looking at this one piece. They're all related. These things all go together. And so this all comes down what we've kind of started to call lean UX. And lean UX is the practice of bringing the true nature of a product to light faster in a collaborative, cross-functional way. And we're looking at a shared understanding of the product experience being designed. So instead of the designers holding up and saying, well, here's our wonderful designs, go build it. You don't need to know why you're building it. We're really talking about everybody getting together, everybody working together. And we'll touch on this at the very end again. But now that we kind of established that baseline, we can start talking about some of the items that we dive into and we see on a lot of applications. Every time I start working with a new team or a new product that's had development without UX, these things come up almost every single time. So the first one, CRUD is CRUD. It's worthless. It's bad. Not totally. We'll get there in a second. So CRUD, create, read, update, delete. In a RESTful application, this is a very, very common pattern. It is one of the core foundations of Rails scaffolding. And it's great when you just want to do one or two little models and have data come and go, and that's great. But once you get into complex flows, things start to break down. So let's look at something that can have a lot of associations with it and how this flow can become really problematic. So we're going to talk about like a contract. This could be a business contract of any kind. It doesn't specifically have to get nitpicky. And a contract's going to have a client and a provider. Somebody's going to be offering something, the person's going to be purchasing that something, and the contract typically is the legal understanding between those parties. In some organizations, you'll have a master services agreement with lots of projects or scopes of work tacked off the side. Okay, so if I'm creating a new contract and I don't have the client in the system and I don't have the provider in the system and I don't have the project in the system, do I have to go out, create that, come back to the contract, and then attach it? Keep going down the pipe here. Now a client has their owner, the provider has the manager for the project, the product's got requirements, milestones, and deadlines. All of these things, if I have to go back out, create them, and attach them in a different view, makes the app horrible to use. And you'd be surprised at how often this is the case. And so CRUD's not inherently bad. It's just the least likely flow in a complex application. Unfortunately, it's also the easiest flow to make. So from here, if we look at some stuff that I've done here in the past, here's a form where we're talking about a submittal. In project construction management, a submittal is when a subcontractor goes to the person in charge of the whole building project and says, okay, I've seen the drawing and here's the details you asked me to provide. Here's what I'm going to do with all the details. Like this is the exact part I'm going to put in right here. Sometimes there's drawings. Sometimes there's things going out from the owner to the person. Sometimes there's things coming back. But instead of having to go in and say, oh, I need to go in and create a separate schedule and then attach that schedule, we just do it in line. Instead of doing items and creating all these items in some master list and then attaching them, we just make them in line. You can even do bulk edit, bulk add, things of that nature. So there is a benefit here because I don't want someone making a new spec section here. So I am not going to allow them to create that in line, right? So some of this stuff, sometimes there is good reasons to have that separation. But more often than not, I find that applications have way too many things separate and the flows aren't thought of. Technically, we match the requirements. Yes, I can add this. Yes, I can add that. Test pass. Red green refactor, it's great. Now we're moving on to a whole new feature set, but we put people in front of this feature and they actually have to use it, and it's not great. It's pretty miserable. So that's one of those smells, like when you have long time to task completion. That's something to think about, and we'll talk about that more here in a little bit. Another thing you're going to see is hierarchy. Our second big fix is hierarchy. So what's hierarchy, right? What are our elements? Some of these things we can talk about are like the size of something relative to another. So think about like a newspaper headline or something like that. If you have a headline that's the same as the body copy, it doesn't jump out. Just a font change, radically different feel. And your headline is an easy point of entry as you're scanning a bigger page. So the most famous one being, I think, Dewey Defeats Truman. You could read that literally from feet away. And now you have some other hierarchy here in your data. You've got a subhead. You've got like other articles with smaller headlines. That's all textual hierarchy. Color. Bright colors are going to draw attention more likely than drab colors or desaturated colors. So a bright, fully saturated yellow is going to get you to look at it a lot sooner than a light blue. This is one of the reasons highlighters come in super bright, obnoxious colors. They make things jump out, right? The more washed out something becomes, the less intensity it's going to have visually. So if you think of Easter pastels, like that kind of yellow or that kind of red versus a stop sign red, much different feel. And when you think about people in a crowd is another good way to think about this. If somebody's wearing a bright orange ski vest, that's going to stand out a lot more than somebody wearing a hoodie and sweatpants that are in gray or black. Contrast is important, and often this is where a lot of designers will fail. They don't check this. So contrast on the left here is horrible, very low contrast. The best two contrasts we can do on the screen are black on white or black on yellow. Those are the highest contrast ratios we can get. And there's a way to test this. You can go ahead. There's the WCAG is the World Wide Web Consortium's accessibility guidelines. And excuse me, the contrast, you never want the contrast ratio to get too low because then it's going to be hard for people to read. You could read it. Somebody else may not. Small fonts can also have a problem here too. I know that I used to spec 11 and 12 point fonts like it was going out of style. And I hit 40 and all of a sudden I have to squint a lot more. So be careful about those kind of things too. You always want to make sure your contrast is good and your size is good. We're going to talk here real quick about alignment. This is another part of the hierarchy. People expect things to be in certain places. This can help you and harm you. So one thing that you'll hear is banner blindness. If you have advertising as part of your product or your site, a lot of people mentally, if it looks like an ad, they block it out. So you've seen a lot of ads in the last 5 to 10 years start to try and mimic content. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Some people really hate it. Some people are just shrug their shoulders at it. I don't think anybody really loves advertising, but it becomes a necessary evil when we have free content. So you can see this though, like look out for things like pull quotes. Pull quotes are going to help jump things out. So we expect certain kinds of information to be certain places. The logo is usually in the upper left. My user preferences, or if there's a notifications blob, that's in the upper right. I expect the sidebar to typically be on the right, not the left. So if you break things out of that, you can it can be good. It can help change things, but more often than not, stick with the known. Repetition. Repeating styles can give us a sense that this is the same as something else, even though they look different. And you see this a lot in music apps. But if you think about it, if you go through and you read a long article and then a sentence is bolded or a sentence is in a different color, or things of that nature, that's going to make you treat that content differently. Hyperlink is a perfect example. You understand that if you see a lot of blue underlines, then there's a lot of places you can go from this content. But if you see here, Spotify, we've got this card thing. We understand that each one of those is a similar type of content. You see the same thing in Apple Music. Each one of these is an album in this case. Or even something like Pinterest. Each one of these is a drill down. There's a shared understanding here of what's going to happen when I click any one of these, even though they all look totally different. Proximity is the next thing I want to talk about. So how closely we place things together tell our users if they're related or not. So if we have a series of images closely together and then we have a bunch of things that are spread out more, the understanding implicitly is that the things closer together somehow are more closely related. Something to think about as you look at your interface. What of these things what's the relation between these objects? One of the most understood things, and probably one of the things you'll have to push back the most when you have a client or an owner say, why can't I get something above the fold, is white space. White space actually can help a user understand what they're supposed to do, where they're supposed to go, and it makes the content easier to digest. Apple is famous for this. They are super white space. They probably take it to the logical extreme. But it doesn't have to necessarily be a white background. It's just the absence of detail in that space. So if you do an inverted site and you have a black background, having a lot of that area just open and empty can help target the eye where it needs to go. And this is not just, it's a nice thing that we think is cool. This is stuff that's actually been studied extensively in psychology and sociology. So white space actually can have strong influences on decision-making and diagnostic error. So, so many things are non-rational factors, like not purely based in statistics or logic, to influence decisions. So if you think about an e-commerce thing, it's the factors aren't nearly like, they're not good or bad per se. It's just they exist and we have to be aware of them. So if you look at this, like, do I recognize this pattern? Like if I'm on Amazon and I use Amazon, I'm going to recognize where things are, which is probably one of the reasons that it drives you crazy when they move the add to list button or they move the add to cart button and you're like, where did that go? You get used to factors. And so then if it's not recognized, then you're going into an analytical mode and you're like, what's this? Okay, repetition. Here's a pattern. This is a pattern I know. And you're not sitting here saying this out loud. This is what's happening technically in your mind. You'll get to a point where you can then also, you'll say, okay, I've got what I'm going to do and I'm going to make a decision. This can be simplified. You'll hear sometimes people refer to the OODA loop, orient, observe, decide, act, or observe, orient, decide, act. So look at where you are, look at, kind of orient yourselves to what's around you, decide on a course of action, take that course of action. Something that came out of the Air Force and fighter pilots. And so how fast you can do that effectively can win the fight. So moving into some textual hierarchy here, we looked at some of these elements, how they play together, but with text hierarchy, so much of our content is text. And there's a whole section here I'll talk about a little later. But when you look at the hierarchy here, we've got a headline, which is level 1. We've got a level 2 subhead, and we've got a level 3 body. There's some other stuff here, such as caption. You could argue level 4 is caption and kind of the information at the top about the author and the date and the time it's going to take to read it. But the key thing here is that on the desktop, 3 levels is great. Once you get to mobile, it's better to try to shift it down to 2 if you can. The screen's smaller. There's less space to have more steps. And here's another example from that project I had shown you guys before. And as we look at some stuff here with this, where's the mouse? Get the mouse. Let's see if the mouse. Okay, the mouse doesn't show up on the screen there. But if you look here, you've got the headline is pretty strong hierarchy. It's there. One of the things that jumps out immediately is the project delay block in green. One thing you can do is if you ever squint at a design, your eye is going to jump to a couple different things. And you don't have to spend a lot of time on this. This isn't like a magical thing. You just squint real quick, and where does your eye jump? For me, my eye jumps to the projected delay block in the budget. It drops to the 10 on the 10R0, and it jumps over to there's some stuff on the right, and there's a bar across that is the table. So that's where my eye is immediately jumping when I squint. Being able to decide what's important and being able to then push that by using the tools of hierarchy is really going to help your end users. Do we have any questions so far? That was a big chunk right there. I want to just make sure we don't get lost.
I don't see any in the chat, so I think you're good to move on.
Right. The next thing is streamlining flows and forms. And the biggest issue here is that a lot of our feature sets, as we develop features and build out requirements, they end up with too many rabbit holes. The definition just gets massive. And the solution here is to boil it down. What is the person's critical task? Where are they doing it? What is the fastest way to complete the flow? And what are the potential pitfalls and sidetracks? So I did a app with some guys here in town in Charlottesville that was a tool for executive assistants and staff of effectively high net worth individuals. And the customer provided a very detailed user, like 3 or 4 page typed user story. And it had a lot of, they might do this, this might happen, they could do this. But you could go through it and kind of find the core that was they always do this when we're talking about this particular story. So we take that core and we turn that into the requirement and really focus on the critical path. So take that, boil it down, what's the critical task, strip away the rabbit holes, work on the core flow and get a better understanding and potential flow. And then you can even take that really quick and start sketching out interface solutions on a whiteboard or something like that from that. So that core feature flow allowed the other pieces to sit nicely beside it because we had said, here's the way we're going to go. Now, everything else you can start to see, well, this doesn't really live here. This doesn't work here. Or, this is a part of a different flow, but they need to be better connected. So boiling it down to the bare minimum and then working from that is often a really good solution to get a better understanding and a better end result. It's also important to look at the previous and follow-on tasks to any given flow. So what are they doing immediately before they start this flow? Did it get started by a phone call? Did somebody walk in and say, hey, I need you to do X? Did an email trigger it? What was the trigger for this flow? Are they sitting on the metro? Are they sitting in traffic? They shouldn't be on their phones anyway, but people are. So what do they typically do after this too? Same question. Where does this lead to? Is this mobile only, desktop only, all of the above? What is going on around them? Are they doing this in a quiet office? Are they doing this in a noisy coffee shop? Are they doing this on a street corner? So what's the fastest way to complete it too? Are there sensible defaults if we're doing any kind of data entry? What are their potential pitfalls and sidetracks? All of these kind of questions start happening when we're looking at the flow. And it starts by boiling it down. And once you can kind of cut out all the cruft, you can really start to boil things down to visual flows that you can talk about from a software perspective. So this is just an example of that. So with the submittals again, so you start to tell your story and it's a very straight line. We avoid a lot of we jump here and then we jump there and then, it's all like, it's a very linear flow here. Excuse me. So boiling it down to this can really help get a shared understanding on your team and move that forward. Now, if you really don't understand what the flow is in the first place, you're not getting good user stories, you don't have a good understanding of the problem and not the solution someone said we're going to build, but why we're building this solution, you need to shadow your users. So whenever possible, this is the best thing to be doing. It's a lot of things often happen or get a ticket created because enough noise has been created from the user base. And it's gotten to say somebody had the ear of the CEO and said, this stinks, I want this better. But if we're proactive, we can find these things before they become those kind of problems. So formal testing is great, but a lot of times you can just do informal shadowing. And that's as easy as sitting in a coffee shop with someone and saying, hey, can you do this real quick and tell me what you think? Living Social, we did this a lot. It was a little more formalized. We were tasked with fixing the customer support app. Our agents SLA was at 20%. Call abandonment was at 20%. There was double entry for data because there were two systems. There was a Rails-based system and Salesforce. So they had the customer case in Salesforce and the customer order in our back office system from the main site. So just watching people work, it was just kind of this, like, you do this every day. Wow. So we went and we spent a lot of time. We fixed this over the course of about 6 months, and we improved the SLA from 20 to 90%. Call abandonment dropped from 20 to 4%. And the time to complete a case was reduced by 20%. So that translates to the company's bottom line and to customer satisfaction. Remember, experience is not just the screen. Experience is the entire interaction of your customer with your product or company. So post-sale, they've converted, but now we want to keep those people coming back and buying again. They need to have a good experience post-sale. And so that's what that focus was. If you think about going back to Toyota, this is dedication. This is 53,000 miles of market research. Yuji Yokoya, the chief engineer for Sienna, was given the task in 2000 to figure out why the Sienna was not competing well with Honda's Odyssey. Honda was outselling them 2-1. So he literally drove it all over North America, Mexico, Canada, CONUS, Hawaii, whole 9 yards. And you can see some of the things here, like bad drivers in Manhattan. So he was getting dense. So he increased the bumper to be able to handle more than a 5-mile-an-hour crash, which the government said you have to handle a 2.5-mile-an-hour crash, and they went higher. Sun glare, getting lost in a place where you don't speak the language, parallel parking, all these things, like literally dog fooding it is what we call it in software, right? But driving the car for 53,000 miles and finding out what was frustrating, the things that kept coming up to him, and then he was like, got to fix that. And they did. And this came out, and this improved their sales numbers dramatically. Some ways we can do this. So we're not going to go and necessarily drive the app ourselves, but we can see what our users are driving. So this is a tool we used at Procore, Full Story. And this records the interaction, and you get to watch people browse your site, and you can talk about it, comment on it, send it back and forth within your team. And you don't have to do it real time. So it's great because you can go back and look through interactions and say, oh, that was interesting. Oh, that problem, I didn't realize that problem was there. So this is a really great tool that we've used to help people identify without having to sit there and have formal testing sessions, which can actually cause people to not act the same way they would when they're not being watched over their shoulder. So we take all this research, and we've got all these ideas, and we understand the people, and we can turn these things into what we call mental models. Indy Young wrote this, and a mental model is basically just breaking it down as to, this is a mental model for somebody's morning routine. But taking all these different things and saying, like, how do I do this? And then what tools do I use to do it in this case? So we actually did this. I worked with Indy on a project for Sybase, and their mental model for how developers used a developer support portal was 3 feet tall and wrapped down the entire hallway there. It was like 20 or 30 feet long. It was pretty intense. So it can get really, really detailed. And these can be, instead of just things you need, it could become tasks. So these are great if you have the time to do them. Often you got to kind of boil this down a little faster, and you do what's called a story map. So the broad top items, and this is just Post-its on a wall. The blue is like working with lists would be an example. It's a broad idea. The green is more specific. It's more of a task, like review my lists or create or change a list. And then yellow are individual tasks. Attach a photo, share this list with other people. And the color dots respond to personas below. So you can see those colors. The orange square is Ben and Rose. The red star is Claire on the left. The green triangle is Matt, Catherine, and Lynn, that group of personas. So you can start to say, here's our prototypical users, and often if you have real users, it's better to have an actual person there that than just a stock photo and a description. But that can kind of help you break these tasks down. And this is something you don't have to be a graphic designer. You don't have to know Photoshop. This is pens, paper, conference room, and talking. figuring it out as a group. And that's when the shared understanding can really come together. And so it's not here. This is not about making deliverables to say we finished something. This is about making good decisions. So our deliverables are going to help drive those decisions. Now, if you're going to do formal testing, Jacob Nielsen from before did a study, and this is 1993. If you want to go read the full proceedings of the ACM Interchi 93 conference, which is where this was presented, you can, but it's about as dry as it gets. But they found that after a certain amount of time, you stop finding new problems when you did heuristic evaluations. So he would uncover 85% of all issues with only 5 users. And so that's one day of formal testing instead of days or weeks. So you can go through, identify the biggest issues, identify them, do it again. And instead of spending a week, you've spent a day, you've reduced your testing budget, and you're getting better data. So there's your happy number right there. And you can see the hockey, well, on its side, hockey stick happen. So it's about ROI here. There's little ROI after 5 people on any given test. And your KPI that you can measure here is time to task completion. So how long does it take somebody to order something and check out? How long does it take for somebody to be able to add a new story to the site? How long does it take for somebody to be able to put this picture up? You know, depending on if you're doing an internal tool or an external tool, you can get better metrics. But that's one of those things, like, get your numbers before you start and then see how they improve. Obviously, if they go down, roll back, start again. Navigation and scannability. These are pretty much constant issues. They've gotten a lot better, but it's still an issue of fighting with people who want their stuff to be seen. When you have multiple divisions in a company on a marketing site, this always comes up. Somebody says, oh, well, my block on the homepage should be higher than so-and-so's block. And at a point, you basically have 15 blocks that you're cramming all above the fold if you just follow that direction. So there's a lot of stuff that you have to say, no, that's not going to work here. One of the most important things to talk about is where am I? So there's a couple ways to help solve this. Upper left-hand corner, make that logo clickable to your home, the home of the app, the dashboard, whatever, or your homepage if it's a marketing site. Having that escape route lets people feel comfortable that no matter where they get, they can come back here. Another way to do it is breadcrumbs. So being able to, if you're walking down a tree, make sure you show where you are walking down. And for the love of all that is holy, if you're doing JavaScript, do not break the back button. Make sure that the back button still works. And so instead of it reloading the previous controller, you want it to actually step back in the history. You want to actually iterate your history stack and step backwards. And that is something that's going to really make a difference. There's 2 ways that people look at content, and they're called the F and Z scanning patterns. And this is eye tracking data that Jacob Nielsen's company did. And so this is pretty common. So you're going to say, as I'm going down, I'm basically going down vertically and then shooting across horizontally. And so I'm making an F in certain cases here. But you can very quickly see where people are focused. People scan down and then jump on a line that they are interested in and read it. And they scan down, jump on the line they're interested in and read it. A Z pattern this is an older version of CNN, and you can see visually, we're going to look at what the new one is and how it's changed dramatically. But a big mast bar at the masthead at the top, I kind of scan across to see what's there. I'm going to then jump down as I kind of jump across the latest, matters, latest news, and then this picture on the right are all kind of things that I scan across. Now the site, this is this morning's CNN, much different. Masthead is effectively gone. It's a dark bar, but unless you're looking for something specific, you don't spend much time on it. You pretty much go right down the left-hand column and start reading those lines across. Maybe you'll jump into the middle column and read those lines across. But it's definitely not a Z pattern anymore. The bigger masthead, though, like medium, I still kind of look, that green dot on the right draws my eye across. So I come in, upper left corner, nope, over to the right, nope, down, ooh, a story. That's my scanning path. So it's important to understand how people are going to start looking at things, and you can position things to help that scanning path. Another thing you're going to see here in navigation is, what am I supposed to do here? Clarity of your flow is critical. And this is one of my favorite pictures to mock. If you have to put a label on it like this, there's something wrong with your interaction design. Vertical handles mean pull. Horizontal handles mean push. If your door can go both directions, then you don't have to worry about this as much. But if you have to label it, the chances are that you've done something wrong from a design perspective. And having gone to architecture school, I just love to mock this one because it is, you'll see this, start looking for these kinds of interactions in the real world, and you will see them everywhere in bad design. Somebody spec'd that. Somebody made a decision that that handle was going to be on that door, and they got paid money to do it. So don't be that person. Another issue you're going to see a lot is first-time user experiences that are blank tables. So, you know, here's a really cool dashboard. There's tons of data in it. Well, what if I have 0 submittals? If this is just like submittals for your review, 0. Upcoming submittals, 0. Submittals and returns, 0. And there's nothing here, and I don't know what to do. It's kind of boring. So one thing we've talked about and one thing we've shown is ghosting data on the right. So there will be data here once you do stuff. Here's a video, quick screencast of how to use this. In this case, it was about a 4-minute video, just under 4-minute video of how to use their submittal system. And some really clear call to actions here at the bottom of what you need to do. So you need to set up submittals for this project still. And then you can import them. You download the template for them if you want to do it that way. a lot of stuff right here. So the first time I come someplace, I'm not just looking at an empty screen saying, okay. So that's kind of our navigation fixes. So that it's important to kind of look at that, love your first time user, make sure people know where they are, and make sure you have clarity of flow. One of the most important things is a lot of people think design is all these pretty images and illustrations and stuff, and design is really 80% typography. Good old Helvetica. Generic sans serif font. Arial is its Windows sister. You see this all over the place. Has a particular feel, but is one of the most loved and best used fonts because it works very well. If I change this to Comic Sans, it has a totally different feel, and some people are twitching. Now, this is Brandon printed. This is one of the fonts I've been using throughout this slide deck, and it's in 2 lines. Feels a lot different. Let's make it vertical. Totally different presentation, totally different feel, totally different way I approach this content. It's kind of hard to read because it's centered and vertical like this. Make it super big and have really compressed leading. This becomes more of like a graphic element that's still type. Something a little more elegant that you'd think of more as like a headline in a magazine, perhaps. You know, we got Helvetica at the top and the bottom, and then I think that's Chronicle condensed or something like that in the middle. And then let's add some color. Radically different, exact same content. That's the kind of stuff when you start looking at design, instead of thinking about, oh, it's an illustration or an icon or this visual picture, how is the type working? How is it handling, conveying this content to the end user? Are they understanding it quickly? You can also look at stuff as simple as the space between the lines, which is called leading. From the old, they literally had lead strips back in the print days. That's where that word came from. On the left is very condensed leading, and on the right is about 1.2. 1.2 to 1.4 is very comfortable for reading body text. Radically different feel. A lot easier to read the stuff on the right than it is to read the stuff on the left. So remember that if you get your typography right, if you really spend time with your designers focused on the just how you convey content, it's going to make a big difference at the end of the day. One thing also little bonus here is that, you know, flat design solves everything. Skeuomorphism is bad. Okay, stitched leather on a screen is bad, but that's not skeuomorphism. Skeuomorph, the top here are actual physical hardware units from a recording studio. They're compressors, the 1176 and the LA2A. The bottom is the plug-in versions of those. A skeuomorph is a derivative object that retains the ornamental design cues that was necessary in the original. So the reason that looks exactly like the hardware is because it works exactly like the hardware. When you push in the button, it changes the ratio. When you turn the knob, it changes the input, the output, or the attack and the release. So that's when people just throw skeuomorphism around as being this horrible thing. No. Make sure you go back. If there's something you're working on that actually needs this kind of interface, don't be afraid to use it. And so flat design solves everything, right? Let's look at this great pie chart. Or is it a pyramid? Let's add some clouds. Now it's definitely a pyramid. Now, flat UI, this is not me just knocking on flat UI, because it can make the stuff look a lot cleaner, but it often causes uncertainty and has less attention. So you have less visual hierarchy happening because you've taken away a lot of that information. So again, here's Nielsen Norman Group, Jacob Nielsen's company, and they do a lot of research here. You know, they're out doing tests. So here's their article on that. You can do a deep dive on. One more bonus. Everyone's always like, well, what software do you use? Well, you can use any software. You can use OmniGravel. You can use Sketch. You can use Photoshop. You could use Illustrator. You could use Azure. You can use Just in Mind. There's tons and tons of tools, and it seems that there's a new one every day. The good news is the only tools you really need to do this collaboratively are in your office supply closet. Sharpies, paper, Post-its, a whiteboard. And it's important to think here that sketching is a far better, faster way to get concepts down and work on concepts together where everybody can be involved. So often I'm working on architectural 12-inch trace. It's comfortable for me, but I can do overlays really fast and really quickly. And if somebody's collaborating with me and they're not a graphic designer, they have no qualms about taking a pen and drawing a box. Here's a flow diagram I did really fast. I can scribble this out a lot faster than dragging boxes around the screen. Once I get it and I need to make it deliverable and I need to have an artifact that lives on Basecamp or Trello or something like that, I can take it and build it in Sketch. But a lot of times at Living Social, we do this. We go in a room, we'd sit down, myself, the product manager, and a couple of the engineers, and we'd scribble on a whiteboard. And this is not high-end fancy design here. This is literally saying this is all text and some lines, boxes and arrows. And real quick, we have a shared understanding of what we're about to build. So we do a micro feature, clamor into a room, do this on Monday, and we'd be shipped by Friday. Two other tools you can use that are just paper. One is called a 6-up, Adaptive Path, which is now part of Capital One, called it a sketchboard. But it's basically 6 frames. You fold the paper in half and then in thirds, and you end up with, you can do a flow. So here is the flow through this. And again, this is literally boxes, arrows, and text. There's nothing fancy here. You don't have to get into like, here's the nice shading on the button. You can, but you don't have to. Here's another example. This is called Crazy Eights. So what we often do with Crazy Eights, and this is something I've done at numerous UX training sessions, is you sit down and say, okay, I want you to draw 8 different ways that you can present this data. And then everybody gets up and talks through like their favorites. And then everybody does it again. And instead of doing 8 the second time, you're going to do 1. And really quickly, you come up with some amazing concepts that, as if you sent a designer away to the mountain and said, come back with your wonderful mock-up, they may never have gotten near some of these ideas because they weren't thinking about the problem that way. When you can have 10 people all have radically different ideas about the product and about that feature, and you get them all on paper, it's the interaction and the idea exchange is amazing. So I'm going to leave you with 2 quotes here. A designer knows he's achieved perfection, not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. This goes back, you'll hear, I kind of said this a couple times already today. Strip things down to the bare minimum. Find that flow, take away all the extraneous stuff, fix the core, then move on to everything else. So these ideas are going to come from all over the place, and you want to be able to pull them in. But if you have a lot of things tacked on, it's really hard to get to that core. And design is just problem solving within a set of constraints. In the grand scheme of things, it rarely has anything to do with graphics. So don't be afraid that UX is something that you can't touch as a developer, or don't be afraid that you can't go jump in an engineering meeting and start scribbling on a whiteboard with the engineers if you're a designer. The more closely you can collaborate, the more closely you can cross over, the better that product's going to become. And one thing that we're working on right now is something called Developer UX, which is going to be a long online course. So if you have any interest in this kind of stuff, you can go there and kind of fill out a quick survey that'll help us understand like what your needs are. We're finishing up like our course outline right now. So take a look at it and let us know your thoughts. And if you put your email in there, we'll let you know when the course goes live. So that is all I have for a presentation. We can do Q&A as long as people want, but hopefully that was good for you guys. Let me take off the sharing and go back to our pictures.
All right. Well, I'm getting feedback from your speakers.
Coming this summer. Yeah. Oh, so the quick brown fox jumped over to the lazy dog. By the way, something funny about that. That is a sentence that has every character in the alphabet. That's why we use it. You can see whenever you type out a font, you can see that every letter form.
All right. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Going once. Going twice. All right. Well, John, thank you so much for joining us today. That was awesome. I really enjoy listening about design theory, because when someone just spells it out for me at least, it just makes a ton of sense. But then when I actually go to do it, that all just flutters away. So, all right.
I feel similar when somebody's like, just this simple kind of whatever method, and I'm like gloss over. I'm like, what? Yeah. How do I type? Or I see the example in code, and then I'm like, how do I do that on my app? So understand the pain.
All right. A bunch of news. Alrighty. Well, we'll go ahead and stop it there. John, thank you again. Thank you to everyone who's joining us. And if you're watching this in the future, congratulations on making it to the future. And if you have any questions, just let us know in the comments. We greatly appreciate it. John, thank you again, sir.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good one.